So the final weekend before Halloween was Washington State's second HorrorCon, hosted at the Washington State Fairgrounds. And this Halloween, I had not one, but two projects in mind to celebrate the 30th anniversary of Capcom's Vampire Hunter. And it's also the year I designed a new fruit sauce partially inspired by Morrigan from Vampire Hunter. So screw it. Let's go for the hat trick today. First, we'll go through the side that doubles as a dessert. Then we'll alternate between covering a convention, held in an uncovered place during the wet season, and the variety of genre shifts that play to this series. I took the purple from the blackberries and the green of the parsley and tea as inspiration. I named this Morrigan's in sauce, partially because Starbucks hasn't sold the ingredients for my Morrigan Aensland secret menu item for 2 years. Morrigan was the adopted daughter of the ruler of a demon realm called Makai, a name that gets used in a lot of franchises. When Belial died, his rebellious little princess became his successor to the throne. Dmitri Maximov, the lord of the vampires, exiled by her father, is either a major nuisance to her or a terrible enemy to her, depending on the writer. Of course, according to some sources, he's as dead as his native franchise. Appropriately enough, it's Morrigan who became the face of Darkstalkers, a classic 90s fighting game that not enough Americans played, despite the fact that its initial inspiration was Universal saying that Capcom could not use their classic monster line. So the Capcom developers made their own. That's how you find content about curiously attractive fishmen on the internet. And if you think what they did with the Gilman's design was something, you should see Sasquatch. Because yeah, they did not stop in that initial batch with the Universal monster movies. They went way away in their own way and definitely made their own thing. But back to the applesauce. I make this by chopping up spare fruit of varying kinds. Most frequently apples and pears are available, but I'm open to adding pears and plums and so many in between. Needless to say, I've been making this out of fruit I've received as payment for picking. Without consistency in supply, I haven't managed consistency in proportion, so I've opted for consistency in process. 1 small resealable bag's worth of freshly rinsed wild blackberries, a container of dried parsley, and however many bags of decaf green tea. Finally, dice the tree fruit and cook it down. When the resulting mush has had time to cool, there will likely still be chunks in it. To smooth it out, run the lot of it through a blender. Then pour what you can back in a pan. What sticks to the side of the blender can be used for lemon/limeade, as long as you take to that soon. Throw the berries in as the sauce is reheated. They'll break down as much as they need to. Stir periodically, forming a thin layer of dried parsley flakes or emptying 2 bags of green tea flakes. Form these just before each stirring, so they're evenly distributed to absorb moisture and condense product. Now, before heading to the fair, let's look at the Puyallup station that's a train's top and the tail end of several bus routes. The importance of trailing along South Meridian Street instead of jumping straight into HorrorCon is to look at the Halloween setups of the businesses along the way. My initial premise for Darkstalkers returning was a comparison between 1, their risen dead status, and 2, stories of corpses actually rising from the grave. Currently, they're as dead as plucked vegetables. And when things in the old world would rise from the grave, they would take on unnatural forms completely at odds with how they looked when they died. So, instead of fighting game, what other genres are Darkstalkers well suited for? And which ones might have fighting elements? Even something like a wrestling game or a belt scroller can have a versus mode for one-on-one 2D combat, the way that Darkstalkers did better than anyone else. Because let's not forget that Darkstalkers' 2D sprites are an immense challenge for 3D to replicate. Look at Jeddah in Vampire Savior, and look at Jeddah in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, if you have the stomach to sit through a Let's Play of MVC Infinite. Then factor in the Skullgirls and other contemporary 2D fighters that use many more frames in a given second or a single piece of animation than were available in the 90s for cartridge cabinets. There needs to be a definite detour from the path that Street Fighter and MVC took when they got sequels in this century. So what is a successful enough genre of game that 2 or more Darkstalkers would be well suited to? And which ones would best afford the option of the involved Darkstalkers being played against each other in the classic arcade tournament style? That last part would probably be proof of concept and prototype more than anything else, and that's definitely neither the main draw nor the main point of whatever this project is. Onto our first genre. Felicia and Lord Raptor are musicians, and Ruby Hart is a pirate, a trade oddly enough strongly associated with singing and accordions. Accordions specifically, would a rhythm game or some other musical play well to them? Or would the entire soundtrack of every Capcom title with a Mackay and then be fine to outsource? Or license out to something like Beat Saber as unlockable content? That last one was a bit of a stretch. And speaking of a stretch, this car photo. Using a picture of Ghostbusters media, let's look at some Ghostbusters nostalgia. I mentioned a couple of times that the Jeff Klein series ended on the Ghostbusters finally turning a fire truck into an anti-ghost cannon, despite having lived and or worked on and off in a firehouse for roughly 15 years by that point. The highlights of Jeff Klein's animation direction were TV spots of established properties, mostly live-action cinema, but may his legacy live on, until someone else needs to convert a garbage truck into a trap and suck in the Bermuda Triangle. If you know, you know. So many insights, missed chances, but since the car show is reserved for its own video, let's jump to prices. As I entered the venue, I promptly noticed signs for fare from the fair. $14 for street corn and $16 for this meat and potatoes. Sounds like Texas. They can take your $24 turkey legs and politely feed them to stray dogs or pets and whoever can eat them safely before they spoil, because basically no one's able to afford them. There were lines for the pricey pizzas, each slice roughly 1/3 the price of them legs, and each of them as much substance. And no fried gator this time. I think that's gone for good, like gummy sharks from the local aquariums. You know, it's quite typical. Halloween goes for sale before school starts up again. Then Christmas is the market for weeks before Halloween. Back to the dark. Then there's dating sims. With all the translation difficulties associated with that genre, it's hard to think you can make one for every market. So, if you have Dmitry Maximoff selecting the next girl to be made evil immortal, then you could have a dating sim. Also, if you had the succubi Lilith or Morrigan selecting various prey, then a full-on dating sim template would work. Dating sims basically play a lot like visual novels. See the original Fate Stay Night and its prequel Fate Zero. If nothing else, this could depict the information in the various characters' backstories. As far as Felicia goes, the various other cat women who appear in her attacks each have their own backstories. No shortage of content to draw from there. And speaking of Sims, a SimCity game where someone manages the Mackay, possibly in Morganstead, is another option. And as for a similar option, there's business manager simulation games. Tecmo had a lot of those even before they merged with Koei. Part of Extreme Beach Volleyball is in fact running the resort that the girls from Tecmo's Dead or Alive are attending. Someone could be Felicia's manager, running parts of the Mackay in Morgan's absence, running damage control for Lord Raptor's antics. The list goes on. Heck, it could be Ruby Hart's managing the running of her own ship, seeing as how she was giving our own little clone for Street Fighter V for a character that was ultimately cut in favor of a bastardized birdie. She could actually go back to Monster Island, just like in Pirate Ship Hajimura's sequel game. The one where the lead battled Red, a reamer from Ghouls and Ghosts. One of my projects that never got off the ground was asking if his inclusion meant that Arthur and his enemies actually takes place in the Street Fighter universe. It would explain a lot, especially regarding Wraith and some of the other Slam Masters. Off to the cosplay photography. Here we see MCU Daredevil and Black Widow cosplaying the team-up between these two after Nat's shared book with the Inhumans fell through. And yes, it was their inspiration. Here's Hawks from My Hero Academia, reimagined as a man who serves fried poultry. Followed up with an Eraserhead. Elvira, being the face of the event, had a couple cosplayers of her own. Strangely not as many as Lydia from Beetlejuice. Popular couples cosplay. But my favorite couples cosplay included the Chestburster. And just past Ripley from Alien, here's the room with the panels in it, thankfully held indoors. While I was remembering the photography exhibits in the Puyallup fairs of my youth in that very room, there was a very personal story told by Bruce Davidson, remembering his youth in the 80s. I asked his co-panelist Kevin McNally a question about Disney's earlier pirate movies.
Trying out some new material, Freddy. I see by your claws you want to turn a raver into a rager.
And if individual Darkstalkers getting non-fighting spin-offs seems strange, remember that Rick Uo and Anna Karras already got cell phone games back in the day. The entire Darkstalkers cast could have had something like that, as cell phone technology developed, or things designed specifically for classic iPods. If the Chaos Tower had been the crossover collection used for the Darkstalkers Resurrection re-release, you could have thrown in with it all information on unused Darkstalker content, including the unused characters, as well as various discarded drafts, and created brand new cell phone and iPod games based off of them too, as part of the interest mining. There was in the early 1990s a Capcom arcade title that was actually 3 different titles. It was called 3 Wonders. A platformer and 2 others, but if there's space on the cabinet or disc, there's room for multiple smaller games. If we're looking at different genres for different collections of individual characters, then we can make space for all of them. Puzzles, dating sims, quiz games, infiltrate Capcom world, and do a whole bunch of different things. And why do I exclusively picture Lord Raptor for that one? Who's going to trust him? Jumping from the discussion of arcade cabinets to the arcade cabinets. There was an interesting one, clearly more than 40 years old, a licensing of Capcom's Black Tiger. I remember the screen stills of top-down views, but this was ghouls and ghosts cross-pollinated with Castlevania. Just goes to show that memory's not always accurate. And just like at Worldcon and Comic-Con, this was a painful struggle flailing about when I wasn't helping someone in a 4-player beat-em-up. And of course, one could just release a bunch of smaller projects and then set literally all proceeds aside to offset the cost of a Darkstalkers sequel, or a big crossover with literally all of their Makai titles. Given the popularity of Resident Evil Village and their own take on Dracula lore, some people might feel this incomplete. But we're talking Street Fighter tie-ins, Hajime Makijima, Nanatsu no Shima Deiboken, Black Tiger, Ghosts and Goblins, Devil May Cry, Beautiful Joe, and whatever else relate to SNK's Makai would show up as a guest for more CVS potential. And if we're outsourcing this to another studio with a working 2D department, there's going to be people from there too. So honestly, for something like that, I'm picturing a lane system scene in Belt Scrollers, classic wrestling games, and the Fatal Fury shared universe. 3 buttons that activate different things based on how long they're held or how rapidly they're pushed. But that's for anyone actually trying to make this thing to figure out. The rest of this, in what form shall the Darkstalkers rise, article has already been posted to my WordPress and DeviantArt. Please like, share, and subscribe. Here and there.
Gotta get that guy's photo. He brings the Krampus spirit with him.